This is the newly released SAVA A7L Pro carbon bike, and after riding it for a good 500-600 kilometers, I think this might just be one of the best value road bikes you can buy for $1,500. It comes with Shimano's 105 12-speed group set, fully integrated aero handlebars with internal cable routing for that clean look, carbon forks, carbon seat post and 50mm carbon fiber wheels. All of this for $1,500. Now, I paid for this bike with my own money and I have no relationship at all with SAVA in any way. After having ridden about 500-ish kilometers on this bike, I'm going to go through what I absolutely love about this bike because there is a lot to love about it, but I'll also go through what I don't like about it because when unboxing this bike for the first time, there were some quite big issues straight away and I had to contact SAVA's customer service to help sort that out. And a bit later on in the video, I'm going to compare this SAVA A7L Pro with my Trek Domane SL5 that I bought again with my own money to see whether a $1,500 Chinese bike can outperform a $3,500 big brand bike, and I think you might be surprised by the results. But first, a quick background overview of SAVA, because I think this is important to understand to get an idea of how they can price this fully carbon bike so affordably. They were founded in 2005 by Chinese cyclist Mr. Yang Yiwu in Germany, so not actually in China. However, in 2012, the company moved its brand and R&D team from Germany back to China, where they've been based ever since. So SAVA kind of positions itself as making high quality carbon fiber bikes more accessible through direct to consumer sales and competitive pricing. And apparently, according to their website, all their frames have a 15-year warranty. So although they've been around since 2005, there doesn't actually seem to be that much information about them online. The odd review video on YouTube from some quite respected YouTube bike reviewers reviewing other SAVA bike models, but the general consensus is SAVA make quite good bikes. The same goes with Reddit, quite a few people talking about them with real world experiences. And again, the general consensus with the people that actually bought them for the most part is very positive, with one person saying he bought a bike with very similar specs as the bike I just bought. It could even be the same model. He's ridden it for about 1,500 kilometers and has had so far a positive experience. So let's get into the specific bike that I bought. So I have the SAVA A7L Pro in size large. For context, I'm 183 centimeters, about 75 kilograms, and it fits me quite well for the most part. I'll go into more detail on the fit a bit later on. I bought this particular bike direct from SAVA's official AliExpress store for $1,557.22 of my own hard-earned cash. I was lucky enough though to get an $80 coupon code which pop up every now and again on AliExpress, and I'll drop a link to this specific bike and any coupon codes if I have them in the description below. It is also important that you do buy from SAVA's official AliExpress store if you can. So I placed the order and it only took 8 days for the bike to arrive on my doorstep. I was expecting it to take 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, but 8 days, not bad at all. And there was no custom fees or import fees. SAVA do have a warehouse in China and another warehouse in the US. So depending on where you are buying in the world, you can probably avoid import fees, but it's probably worth checking with SAVA's customer service first. They are very responsive and helpful, at least they were with me, but I'll go into SAVA's customer service again a little bit later on. So 8 days after placing the order, this bike behind me arrived on my doorstep and I was super excited. It was like Christmas. It seemed to be packaged very well and I started to unpack it very carefully, being very careful not to scratch any of the carbon frame with my scissors. But as I started to unbox it, I started to see some issues, mainly around the handlebar area. So the first thing I noticed was the handlebar tape had been ripped. And I thought, okay, maybe it was when I was opening up the box and I got a bit too excited and my scissors caught the tape and cut through it. But then inspecting the bike further, I saw one of the rubber sleeves on the hood had a small cut through it. And then I was thinking, okay, that definitely wasn't me that cut that. I wasn't that careless when unboxing it. And then a third thing I noticed, there was a small chip on the paint just above the carbon fork. Okay, so that's 3 different things that are damaged, and I've not even assembled the bike yet. So I contacted SAVA's customer service on AliExpress and I showed them the pictures. They replied asking for pictures of the box when I received it, and that's when I noticed the extra yellow tape on one side of the box. So it seems like during transit it was damaged and the delivery company tried to repair the box by adding extra yellow tape to it, which kind of makes sense because the rest of the bike was completely undamaged. All the damage was to the front of the bike. Anyway, I was a bit apprehensive when talking to SAVA's customer service because often with Chinese companies, their customer service can be a bit hit or miss, but to SAVA's credit, they responded immediately and sorted me out straight away. That's another reason to buy direct from SAVA's official store as opposed to a third party. So they asked me to take the bike to a bike shop, get it all repaired, and then send them the invoice and they'll cover the cost. So the damage to the bike was more of an issue with the delivery company mishandling the bike as opposed to an issue with the actual bike itself. Anyway, before I get into the bike itself, the model I have here is the SAVA A7L Pro, which is the newest model that was released just a couple of months ago. So they have another lower level model, which is the A7L, not the A7L Pro. So the A7L is about $200 to $300 cheaper. The main difference between the older model and the Pro model is that the Pro model uses a complete Shimano 105 R7120 group set, which includes superior hydraulic disc brakes and shifters. So basically you get improved braking power and smoother gear changes. The A7L model uses more budget sensor components, whereas the Pro model just uses Shimano components. And I thought it's worth spending a couple of $100 extra for the full Shimano group set. Anyway, after I got the bike back from the bike shop, that's when I could properly inspect the bike, and overall I was very, very impressed. I had new bar tape fitted to replace the old ripped tape. I quite like the matte gloss design of the new tape. It was from an Australian company called Berg. Really nice tape. I'm not affiliated with them. I just really like their tape. It has fully integrated bars, which makes the cockpit look very clean. Integrated bars on a $1,500 bike is not that common. Integrated handlebars as upgrades alone cost like $200 to $400. So including them on a complete bike at $1,500 does represent very good value. And that's kind of the theme of this bike. It's just very good value for money. Because I'm used to riding my Trek Domane SL5, with this SAVA, the handlebars were a bit narrow for my liking. I just felt the stability wasn't quite there, especially when standing on the pedals and really pedaling hard, like when you're climbing a steep hill or sprinting. Saying that, that's probably just a me issue in that I'm used to riding with wider bars. The benefit to narrow bars is that it's just slightly more aero, which is kind of the theme of this whole bike really, to be as aero as possible. The frame, the fork, and the seat post use T800 carbon fiber, so it's relatively lightweight at 8.9 kilograms. It uses Shimano's, as I mentioned, 105 12-speed group set, so it's tried and tested. So far, it's not skipped a beat as expected from Shimano 105. It has a 50-34 crankset and the 11-34 cassette, offering a wide range of gears for different terrains. And as for the wheels, you've got SAVA's in-house 50mm rim depth carbon fiber wheels. Again, at $1,500, getting 50mm carbon fiber wheels as standard is pretty impressive. This bike is really putting pressure on the big brands to start bringing their prices down a bit because they're having to compete with bikes like this A7L Pro. It's even just seemingly small stuff like the wheel notch that's carved out on the seat tube to make it that bit more aero. And that costs money to carve out a wheel-shaped curve into the carbon frame, something that, for example, the Trek Domane doesn't have. Anyway, I'll do a quick comparison of the SAVA and the Trek Domane SL5 a bit later on in the video. The wheels are paired with 25mm tyres. It would have been nice to see 28mm tyres on this, as that's kind of the general direction tyre width is going these days. And it's the one upgrade I'd have to make on this bike. I have tried to keep the bike as standard as possible, by the way, keeping the original wheels, the original tyres, pretty much everything as standard, because if I just upgraded everything, it wouldn't make much of a meaningful review for you guys. But the tyres are the main thing I'd upgrade on this bike. I'd stick some 30 or even 32mm Continental GP5000s on them, because that would really transform the bike, especially the roads where I live are very rough. There's so many potholes just everywhere. But a bit more about the ride and the comfort and the ergonomics a little bit later on. Now onto the saddle. So this is the most comfortable saddle I've ever ridden on. I can ride 100 kilometers or more, no issues at all. I did some research on the saddle. They call it the DE99 saddle, but there's really very little to no information on it online. I don't know if it's kind of a generic in-house brand, but I do know so comfortable. It feels good quality too, and it looks very premium. It looks like quite an expensive saddle. It also looks suspiciously similar to the S-Works Power Comp saddle. But anyway, I love the saddle. The comfort of the saddle was definitely a pleasant surprise. So as I mentioned, I put about 500, maybe 600 kilometers on this bike, long enough to get a good idea of what the bike's about, but I'd still consider this kind of a first impressions video. I'll do a long-term review in about 3 to 6 months after putting a lot more miles on it. But first impressions riding the A7L Pro, it rides very nicely. The carbon frame does a great job of smoothing out road vibrations without feeling sluggish, despite the stock 25mm tyres. It's got that kind of nice balance where you can feel the road, but it's not beating you up on longer rides. The geometry feels relatively aggressive, but not uncomfortably so. I could easily spend 3-4 hours in the saddle without any real comfort. It is slightly more of an aggressive riding position compared to my Trek Domane. So you can see in this image, the seats of both bikes are roughly the same height, but the bars on the SAVA are about 2 to 3 centimeters lower, putting you in a slightly more aggressive or aero position, even though I've slammed the stem on both bikes. Acceleration feels responsive when you put the power down, and it climbs well. The bike doesn't feel like it's holding you back when you're grinding up the hills. It is 8.9 kilograms, so sure, it's not as light as some of the more expensive bikes, but again, for $1,500, I think 8.9 kilograms is very good. The Shimano 105 shifts are crisp, they're reliable, exactly what you'd expect. Descending, it feels stable and predictable, though as I mentioned earlier, those narrow handlebars did take some time getting used to compared to my Trek Domane. But what impressed me most was how planted it feels at higher speeds. There's no kind of strange flex or concerning handling quirks. It just feels like a proper road bike that happens to cost a lot less than what you'd pay for something similar from bigger brands. In terms of ergonomics, I did feel the stem was very slightly on the shorter side. When I had a bike fit, my bike fitter also confirmed this. It's nothing too drastic, and for me at least, it's not really problematic enough to go out of my way to buy a longer stem, but it is something that I did notice. And as I mentioned earlier, I did slam the stem because it is a more kind of aero-oriented bike, so I might as well lean into that and make it as aero as possible. But even with a slammed stem, it does feel very comfortable indeed. Okay, so let's go through what I like about this bike, the small things that I haven't mentioned yet. So I like the fact that the seat post has extra grip on it to stop it from sliding down. That's actually an issue that I had, and quite a common issue, with the Trek Domane, where after a few months of riding it, the seat tube just very slowly started sliding down. I mean, a drop of anti-slip agent soon fixed it, but it's nice to see that these small touches on the SAVA bike, which I wouldn't have necessarily expected on such an affordable carbon bike. I also like that the carbon wheels don't have huge in-your-face decals or branding on them. The branding is just gloss black on a matte black wheel, so very subtle, and I appreciate that. These actually look quite premium and understated, the kind of wheels you'd see on much more expensive bikes. The 50mm depth gives you that aero advantage without being so deep that they become unmanageable in crosswinds, which is perfect for most riders. They're tubeless ready too, which is becoming pretty standard now and still nice to see at this price point. I also like that it's UCI approved, so if you ever wanted to enter a sanctioned race, you know this bike would be legal to compete on. It's not something most people will ever need, but it does speak to the legitimacy of the frame design, and it shows you that SAVA isn't just throwing together some random carbon shapes and calling it a bike. They've actually engineered this to meet professional racing standards. So now onto the small things that I don't like about this bike. So firstly, there are 2 or 3 very small bubbles on the chainstay protector. Again, not a big issue. It's not going to affect how the bike rides, but it is a quality control issue which shouldn't really be happening. And when assembling the bike, I had to cut off these 2 plastic bumps on the stem because they wouldn't fit. I ended up slamming the stem anyway, so it didn't actually matter in the end, but it's just something worth noting. And the matte black paint, I'm probably being way too nitpicky here because this is the case with pretty much all matte black paint, but you can see every fingerprint, every small bit of grease, every speck of dust on the frame, so it's not an easy bike to keep clean. And yeah, I probably am being a bit nitpicky because the bike is, in my opinion, ridiculously good value for $1,500. But at the same time, I don't want to get overexcited and be like, this is the perfect bike, because it absolutely isn't. But I do want to make this review as objective and as fair as possible. Okay, so I think the value of this bike is really highlighted when I compare the A7L Pro with the Trek Domane SL5 that cost double the price. So there are a few areas where the Trek wins, like you can actually go down to your local bike shop and pick up a Trek if they have it in stock, which is kind of hit and miss these days. The Domane has what Trek calls ISO speed, where basically the seat post and frame are decoupled, therefore helping to absorb bumps in the road, making the Domane slightly more smoother to ride. But the ISO speed technology does add weight to the bike, which I'll talk about the weight a bit later on. I also love the in-frame storage of the Trek Domane, which I can put my spare tubes in, my Allen keys, tyre levers and mini pump in there. But then again, the Domane is more of an endurance bike as opposed to an aero or an all-out race bike. And because of these extra features, the Domane is quite a bit heavier, coming in at about 9.7 kilograms versus the A7L Pro, which comes in at about 8.9 kilograms. However, in some areas, the A7L Pro wins. So the A7L Pro has integrated cable routing within the bars and the frame, which I absolutely love. It makes the bike just look so much cleaner. It also has aero handlebars and an aero seat tube, and it comes standard with 50mm carbon wheels. Now, with my Trek Domane, it came as standard with these tiny 21mm width aluminium wheels, which makes it look more like a commuting bike than a race bike, and they add a fair bit of weight too. So it's like if you wanted 50mm carbon wheels on your Trek Domane, you'd have to spend at least another $350, $400, maybe even $500 to upgrade them. And then there are the smaller things, like what I mentioned earlier, the extra grip on the seat post that stops the post from sliding down, which the Domane doesn't have. So then it's a question of, are the extra features that the Domane have worth paying an extra $2,000 or $2,500 more if you wanted 50mm carbon wheels? To some people it would be, to others not so much. And I think, knowing what I know now, 1.5 years ago, instead of buying the Domane, I would probably buy the SAVA A7L Pro instead and save myself $2,500. And I think that really reflects who this SAVA A7L Pro is for people that have a lower budget, that don't necessarily want to drop $3,000 or $4,000 on a carbon road bike. Or maybe it's your first carbon road bike and you just want to try out the sport, see if you like it. This A7L Pro would be perfect. And to be honest, I actually bought this A7L Pro to be a second bike on my indoor smart trainer. But I love it so much, it's probably going to become my main bike, at least after I switch out the tyres to 32 or at least 30 Continental GP 5000s. So I'll drop links to this exact bike in the description below with AliExpress coupon codes if I have them, because occasionally I do find $50 or even $100 coupon codes. The problem is they tend to expire quite quickly. And if you like this video, you can check out any of these on the screen, and I'll see you over there.